I'm very pleased to introduce another of my very admired and valued colleagues in Washington, D.C. He is the president of a terrific organization called Americans for Limited Government. His name is Rick Manning. He has served in official positions himself, notably in the Department of Labor, but he is a tremendous resource as well on what government is up to that is wasteful and, frankly, contrary to our interests. But we asked him to come today specifically to talk about some research that he's been doing on something that is underway as we speak, the so-called Trans-Pacific Partnership and fast-track authority that the Congress is being asked to give the president to finish negotiating it and then more or less rubber stamping it. And it has very profound implications for immigration policy, among other things. Rick Manning.
Okay, I've got good news for you. I'm taking my watch off. I'm sticking it right here because, you know, anybody from Washington who gets a microphone in front of them can get dangerous. You know, we're all just blessed to be here. Frank's organization, Center for Security Policy, does such an incredible work in D.C. and really underappreciated work. And it's been my profound pleasure to get to know Frank and get to become a friend of Frank and get to see the work they're doing, give some of these briefings. And truthfully, it's scary. It's really scary what's going on. And it's people like you who are going to wake this place up and are going to say, wait a second, we can't allow this to occur. We cannot allow our country to be taken from us by one administration with a bad intention. So I appreciate you all coming out this in a morning. I'm not a morning person, so when I saw it was 9 a.m., I was somewhat taken aback, but you know, my wife one time told me that, she said, oh, get there at 6, and it was and I asked her AM or PM, and she indicated that yes, AM does come. So I do appreciate all of you who are able to get out at an early morning to hear this stuff. Now, let me tell you, there's a lot of things that happen in Washington, D.C., and a lot of them get couched in terms that are really kind of different. You get all sorts of acronyms and everything. And so I'm going to take you through something that politicians try to make hard, but it's really pretty easy to understand. As we know, President Obama's policies have ranged from disastrous to deadly. We've endured Fast and Furious, Benghazi, the rise of ISIS, losing Iraq, the near abandonment of Israel, a climate treaty with China that puts them on a fast track to being the dominant economic power in the world within 15 years. We see the Iranian nuclear deal that puts Iran on a pathway to a nuclear weapon. I mean, it's almost unfathomable, the number of things that are going on and the number of mistakes, the number of problems flowing our way. But you know, 19 months. We got to hold out for 19 months and stop this guy for 19 months and get somebody different. Somebody with a vision for America, of American greatness, someone who appreciates American exceptionalism, somebody who appreciates the life that we have and wants to promote it as opposed to tear it down. Now, America, in spite of President Obama, remains the greatest country in the world. And contrary to the song, it isn't the amber waves of grain. And believe it or not, even here in Iowa, it isn't the Field of Dreams baseball diamonds carved from cornfields. America's great because our government is uniquely based upon the simple idea that our people have God-given rights. The simple idea that the government works for the people, not vice versa, and limited government is the best government. a place born with a declaration that all men are created equal and sealed by a constitution which puts power in the hands of representatives of the people, and not in an executive branch, which is supposed to just execute the laws, not create them. But in Washington, D.C. today, we see everything turned on its head. We see President Obama using his pen and his phone to turn irrigation ditches into navigable waterways so the Clean Water Act can be used to regulate farmers. We see in D.C. him waving his pen, and Congress's congressional control over immigration evaporates. And we see a Congress too weak to stand, too weak to fight tooth and nail, too weak to protect our nation's vital interests from those who are invading us across the Rio Grande. Now President Obama wants Congress to trust him with what Senator Mitch McConnell calls an enormous grant of power by giving him fast-track trade authority. People from D.C. like me often try to make these things real complicated and to confuse you. I'm going to make it real simple. Here's what fast track is. It says that the president can present a trade deal, and it will only require a simple majority vote in both houses to pass it, not the two-thirds ratification requirement is laid out in Section 2 of Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution. We get to that point because there's a justification for it, because there's advice that's supposed to be provided in fast track. And using the Commerce Clause, Congress has figured out a way around the ratification process through this fast track legislation. But it's dangerous. And there's a reason why Congress wants a two-thirds ratification requirement for a treaty, because treaties are important. Now, there are other provisions in the fast track legislation that people will talk about. There are provisions which try to make it so President Obama can't run amok and try to rein him in. In fact, the legislation itself is about 100 pages long. All those 100 pages are eyewash. They don't mean anything. Because ultimately, all the fast track legislation does, in terms of all that stuff about things, demands on Congress, is one simple thing. It provides advice. Advice, as we all know, can be discarded. And President Obama is discarding that advice. In fact, we know that because Congress, in a couple of different instances, has given him advice. They've said, we don't want immigration incorporated into a trade deal. Don't want it. Bipartisan letter on multiple occasions. So what's in the Trans-Pacific Partnership? There's a section on immigration. Congress has said, you know, one of the great problems we have is that Japan engages in currency manipulation, and so consequently, no matter what we do, our automobiles, when they're sent to Japan to be sold, are always more expensive, and so they don't sell. And so a majority of the House and a majority of the Senate sent a letter to President Obama saying, we want currency manipulation dealt with in this deal. If we're going to do a trade deal with Japan that includes Japan, we want currency manipulation in it. Because without it, you can deal with the tariffs, but currency manipulation is the 21st century way that you actually create protectionist barriers. President Obama's trade rep told them, no, we're not putting it in there. Too bad. So yes, Congress can advise the president all they want. Ultimately, it doesn't mean anything. Now, President Obama has spent the past 5 years negotiating this Trans-Pacific Partnership. This year, he's coming to Congress and asking for fast track. The way it's supposed to work is fast track is supposed to be something where Congress up front says, you need to put this, 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 and this into a trade deal. And if you do that, then we will then allow you to pass that trade deal without the two-thirds ratification. What it's not supposed to be is, okay, you negotiate a trade deal, and then you send it to us, or you have it all ready to go, and then we'll change the rules in terms of what it takes to ratify the trade deal. That's what we're doing right now. In the Senate this upcoming week, there'll be a debate on the trade deal. There's a big fight going on. You never know what's going to happen. They've got some other stuff they're supposed to do, but it's on the calendar for this week. So we'll probably see fast track on the calendar this week. So pay attention to C-SPAN. You'll hear debates on it. But you can't get around fast track without looking at TPP, without looking at the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a trade deal which President Obama calls the most progressive in history. So when President Obama is calling something the most progressive in history, probably should pay attention. And yet, it's the Republicans who are pushing forward with it, which puts me in the uncomfortable position of being on the same side of Harry Reid, which I don't think has ever happened in the history of the world. But for all the wrong reasons, Harry Reid is right. But this deal's already written. But here's the weird thing about it, and I'm completely off my notes, so I might as well throw them away. The deal's already written, so here's the weird thing about it. Congress, which is going to vote on fast track, first of all, you and I can't read the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's secret. Okay? So you and I can't read it. It's not like a bill. It hasn't been signed by the president, so it's still a treaty to be negotiated, so it isn't a public document. Congress can, but here's what they have to do. They have to go to a basement office in the sub-basement of the Capitol. They have to sign in. They have to go in and read a 600-page document. They can't take notes. They can't make a copy of it. They can't do anything that would resemble due diligence about what's in this, so they can skim it. And you skim 600 pages, you might miss a few things, it seems to me. But they skim it, and in good faith they try to do it, and people of goodwill can come on different sides of whether they should pass this bill. Having said that, I think there's no excuse for passing the Trans-Pacific Partnership if you believe in limited government. Here's some of the things that you'll find in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There's a section on, as we talked about, on labor. There's a section on immigration. There's a section on intellectual property. There's a section on climate change. Now, I don't know what those sections say. What I know is, if I'm negotiating a deal, I don't put something into the deal that I don't intend on using. I don't have 22 out of the 27 sections of a trade deal be not about trade, but be about regulations. And what's more, the people who I'm negotiating that trade deal with are not just the 11 other countries that are part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but it's all of the friends of Obama, like Hollywood and the Silicon Valley, who are going there and making sure their goodies are taken care of. WikiLeaks had a memo from Sony going back and forth telling Google that they wanted Google to make certain that the Attorney General of California knew that if certain language wasn't in, that Obama didn't put certain language into the TPP, that they wouldn't be able to support it, but if the language was in there, they would support it. Hollywood came out in favor of the TPP. So we know that the guys with big stakeholders are getting taken care of. The ones who've been at the table with Obama from day one are getting taken care of. But you and I can't read it. Sony can, but you and I can't. So we have this trade deal. And it turns out it's not a trade deal. It's sold under the rubric of free trade. It's not a free trade deal. It's a managed trade deal at best. It's a picking of winners and losers, just like they try to do in DC. Every single day I fight against it, and they're now doing it on an international level. And what's more, it is a regulatory deal. Because what we're seeing is that the regulations in the United States and around the world that what these corporations want to do is they want to harmonize the regulations so you have a free flow of people, of labor, goods, services, and money without regard to borders. Now, I would ask you, and I see Frank stood up, so I didn't look at my clock, and now I'm probably done. But I would ask you to do this. Today, you're going to hear from some presidential candidates. 6 presidential aspirants have come out against this deal. We have Chris Christie came out just the other day. Rand Paul came out against it because of the secrecy angle. We have Carly Fiorina, Donald Trump. We have Bobby Jindal, and Mike Huckabee. And so we have a large number of the Republican candidates for president who have come out against it. We also have Elizabeth Warren who's come out against it. So we're in this weird spot where, for different reasons, a general distrust of what's going on is driving both Elizabeth Warren and Bobby Jindal to the same conclusion, that you can't trust this president to negotiate a deal, and this Congress needs to hold him to the highest standard of accountability possible and not give him a pathway to passage of a deal unless they've fully scrutinized it and force him to justify every aspect of it. And today I'd ask you to join me in helping defeat this fast track by contacting your senators, contacting your congressmen, and urging them to oppose fast track and to come out publicly and demand that President Obama's trade deal end up being fully scrutinized based on Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution with a 2/3 ratification vote. Thank you very much for your time. Does anybody have any questions? Wow,
Could you clarify the difference between the TPP and fast track? They're not two different bills, are they?
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that question. This is why it gets confusing. Fast track is enabling legislation that makes it so the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, can be then voted on with a simple majority. Okay? So they're two separate bills. They're voting on fast track. That's what they're pushing now, because they have to get fast track in order to allow for the Trans-Pacific Partnership to be rubber stamped and passed through Congress. If it's forced to deal with a 2/3 majority, it does not pass. If it has a simple majority, it does. Thank you for that question.
Can you please comment on Senator Cruz's amendment to the TPP on immigration and the status of it, please?
Sure. That amendment came out the day after I sat down with 2 of my colleagues for an hour and 20 minutes, one-on-one with Mr. Cruz, and went through a lot of the concerns. Senator Cruz has offered an amendment that would attempt to say if there's any immigration language that's deleterious in the TPP, in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, fast track would be rescinded. That's what the amendment attempts to do. The challenge is you can't really do what he's trying to do. You can vote on it and you can have a legal case after the fact, but once you have the fast track given, then somebody has to determine that it's in violation of this section. And while none of us can read the immigration section, those who can, Senator Jeff Sessions, has extreme concerns about what it could do, but that doesn't mean that those concerns will be shared by the Speaker of the House or the Senate Majority Leader, who both support the bill. So they would be the ones who'd really have to trigger the removal of fast track. And so we'd actually be saying to the people who are trying to push it through, well, gee, we shouldn't have fast track because we don't like the language, this bit of language in it, and we'd be at the mercy of those who support it. So while I really appreciate the efforts that Senator Cruz and Senator Sessions has joined him on this in terms of doing that, I think it's a noble effort. I think it provides us with a hook if we end up fighting TPP on the floor of the Senate. But I have little faith that it will actually prevail in the end as being the prevailing law.
Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
I was wondering, how is it that an agreement with a foreign country could ever supposedly not constitute a treaty requiring two-thirds vote by the Senate simply because it's a trade agreement? Isn't it something that in its nature is a treaty anyway?
Yes, that's what I would say. I could give you what the other side would say, what people who are proponents would say. Because of the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution, which is viewed really broadly by the courts, there's a wiggle room where you can create for a trade deal under the Commerce Clause a methodology where you can have a simple majority vote by turning it into the equivalent of a bill. But you need to have enabling legislation, fast track, to define those trade agreements as being covered under the Commerce Clause rather than under the treaty powers under Section 2, Article 2, Section 2. That's what they would say. I disagree with that, but in fairness, that's the argument that Senator Cruz made to me, and Senator Cruz is a very, very good lawyer and a very smart man, and I don't argue the law with Senator Cruz, but I will tell you, I just said, sorry, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. So.
Who drafted this TPP? Was this in the Department of Commerce, or how did this even come into fruition? And then I'd like to know, in your opinion, is this TPP a cornerstone and perhaps a founding document for a one world government?
Okay, in terms of the Trans-Pacific Partnership is a result of negotiations from the U.S. Trade Representative's Office with 11 other countries, 6 of whom we already have robust trade with. We already have about $800 billion a year of trade with the Trans-Pacific Partnership countries that we would do this trade deal with. In terms of this, but it was done by the U.S. Trade Rep's Office with guidance from the administration. Now, in terms of the second question, I'm going to actually look down because I did not go to this part of my speech because I got off my paper, but there's a quote here that's really, really significant. And I wanted to share it with y'all because it answers that question, if I can find it. Japanese Prime Minister was at the White House a few weeks back talking about Trans-Pacific Partnership. And his terms, if I can find them, I wanted to read them exactly, but if it's not here, it's fine. He did say that they're putting together a regime for allowing unlimited flow of labor, money, and goods and services in the Asian Pacific region. We're part of the treaty. We have a whole Pacific region, a whole border there on the Pacific. I grew up there. So we're part of that regime. The language that is used, that he used, mirrors language used when the Europeans decided to do the common market. His language was exactly the same as the common market language. You can take that for what it's worth in terms of answering the question. Yes.
I just have a simple question.
Sure.
This fast track authority, is that just applicable to this TPP?
No, sir. It would be a 7-year authorization, 3.5 and 3.5, with some kind of way they're going to determine if it goes for an extra 3.5. And so it would cover other treaties. So if you're concerned about TTIP, which is the negotiation in Europe, TTIP would be included in it. So if President Obama were to agree with the European demands on GMOs, for instance, that would be forced to come to the U.S. Senate, to the U.S. House with a simple majority vote, with no capacity to filibuster, and would not be able to be amended. So it would include TTIP, the negotiation in Europe, and other trade deals that might be negotiated. What's more, with Trans-Pacific Partnership, it's a docking agreement, which means that President Obama could say, I want China in this agreement, and through the stroke of a pen, he could add China to the Trans-Pacific Partnership without having, and It's a matter of dispute, since I can't read it, I can't tell you who wins. It's a matter of dispute whether or not that would even require congressional approval for adding additional countries into the TPP. So so this has broad implications. It's a massive giveaway of power to the executive branch, and it could fundamentally change how our entire economy works and our capacity to make laws and make the regulations that are good for America rather than those that might be good in Australia, Burma, or anywhere else around the world. So thank you, Frank. And thank you all for your kind attention.